Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight? Aha! Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to How We're the podcast from Local Report. And even though it feels 2 minutes ago that we were celebrating our victory at Wembley and a return to the Premier League, the real thing is just around the corner already. I'm not sure if it's maybe because, here at How We're the podcast, we've released a pod almost every single day since then. But the real thing has come round very quickly, where we're once again talking about looking forward to actual football matches, albeit pre-season friendlies. Because this weekend, we have what is becoming almost a traditional pre-season opening double header against South Shields and Gateshead. So we thought we'd get someone on to talk about it, and who better than someone who specialises in non-league football for the non-league paper, as well as writing for the Journal, the Chronicle, Sunday Sun, Shields Gazette, Sunderland Echo, as well as 442 and When Saturday Comes. We are very pleased to welcome Mark Carruthers. Hello, Mark.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad. We were just talking before we started recording that just this merry-go-round never stops, does it? The summer it just gets busier, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's been a really busy year, to be fair. I think for Sunderland and for the non-league clubs in the region as well. There's been a lot going on across the board, and no signs of slowing during the summer. So don't feel as if I had a break, but probably wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, that's it. Especially when you cover so much, because I said in the intro, that you've written for a lot of publications, and you do write. And I was reading some of your articles earlier before we started talking. You obviously cover a lot of non-league in the northeast, and you were telling us it's maybe over 50 clubs that you try and keep track of. So I mean, let's say in the summer and when the season starts, what's your average week look like in terms of who you cover and when?
It's probably difficult to give you an average week because I'm not really sure what an average week is, if I'm honest. Obviously the main focus is on the non-league side of it for the sort of Journal, Chronicle, Sunday Sun, Shields Gazette, Sunderland Echo. But at the same time, I also obviously support the Sunderland and Newcastle United coverage across the Shields Gazette and the Echo as well. So it's a really busy week. But in terms of non-league, it'll generally be sort of match previews on a Monday for a Tuesday night, at a game Tuesday, probably at a game Wednesday. Thursday will be the previews for the weekend games for the Friday and Saturday papers across the Gazette, the Echo, the Journal and Chronicle. Saturdays always at a game, if there isn't one on a Friday night. Generally, across the National League North, Northern Premier League East, and Northern League, and then producing everything for the Sunday Sun coverage, and then Sunday is doing the same again for the Monday papers. Bit of a reaction and look forward to the next week. So it's busy, but I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. And we are generally very, very blessed to have such a thriving non-league scene up here. Some of the clubs that we have are some of the most famous non-league clubs in the country. So it's a good patch to cover, and I really enjoyed.
That's it. I don't know if I imagine you've read it, but my mind's gone blank about the author. But one of the best books I've ever read was The Far Corner.
Harry Pearson.
Yeah, that's it. And he did a follow-up, didn't he?
Did, yeah, The Far Corner, yeah.
Yeah. You never fancy doing that and chronicle your experiences out and about?
I mean, I've written one, which was about the FA Vars. Obviously, the region's got a very successful history in the FA Vos, and it was just looking at one person for every winning team, giving a bit of a take on their story. Julio's in it, actually. Julio Arca was one of the chaps dedicated to Julio and his success at South Shields. So, yeah, but I mean, Harry's books are absolute treasures, aren't they? They're two of my favourites in my bookshelf, and just an iconic read, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking about talking about getting started in terms of pre-season, but just when does things get underway? Because the FA Cup starts it starts this month, doesn't it?
Well, the Northern League season starts 2 weeks on Saturday, so
right.
technically it starts a week on Saturday with the Cleater Cup, which is kind of their version of the Charity Shield, really, or Community Shield, or whatever it's called these days. But the league season starts on the following weekend, on the final Saturday of July, and then the FA Cup is the following Saturday. So all this nonsense about the FA Cup starting in January is complete rubbish. It starts on the first weekend of August, with some very, very interesting ties as well in the region. So kick starting early.
Well, that's it. I mean, Sunderland fans kind of we for a few years we got used to it starting in December, which wasn't much fun. I have to admit. But yeah, and actually I feel quite embarrassed because I thought I knew quite a lot about football, and in the first 5 minutes, I'm sure you've mentioned leagues I've never heard of and cups I've never heard of. Almost already just in the first 5 minutes. But look, I mean, we're talking about, when we jump on and talk about Sunderland and the goings on, we're talking about especially the move up to the Premier League, which has been a massive step up for that kind of coverage. But where we've got kind of big names in the media saying we're rumoured with such and such and such and such. I mean, we kind of gather those rumours and we obviously talk about them. However, how many of those rumours come off is debatable. But I mean, in terms of non-league football, how frantic is it? Because I imagine, in the world of kind of short-term contracts, it's just kind of players moving here, there, and everywhere constantly.
Yeah, I mean, it can get hectic, and at the same time, I wouldn't say I don't get involved in it. You've always got to sort of keep your ear to the ground. But in terms of speculation about signings or, managers leaving, managers coming, I always sort of pick and choose when I get involved in that, because sometimes it's a big thing, sometimes it's not. I mean, with all due respect, is a player in the sixth tier of the non-league game signing for another league rival really going to, make a lot of headlines? Probably not, with all due respect to them. If it's a player, and this kind of happened in January with Gateshead, if it's a player being linked with a move to the Football League, then yes, it will create a bit of headlines. And I look at Owen Aseni, who left Gateshead, their top goal scorer. I think he scored against Sunderland last pre-season, actually. Owen signed for St Mirren in January and has since moved back to England with Plymouth, and there was a little bit of a sell on there. So you kind of, that's going to make headlines because it's a Football League club. So you do kind of pick and choose. But in terms of what you hear and kind of what you pay attention to, there will be a lot over the summer, over the course of the season as well.
Yeah. And you've just kind of mentioned a slightly kind of glamorous one, if you like, someone moving from non-league up to St Mirren and then moving up the pyramid up to Plymouth. But sometimes do we forget, at those levels, that actually it's people, when they're looking for contracts, almost there's people looking to almost pay for their mortgages when they make a move.
What are the key things when I speak to lads that have been released by, sort of the big three, and they're looking to move into a club and they look at non-league? I think there's been a little bit of a sea change in the attitude recently, where players have maybe initially looked at non-league as a real step down, and as if you're going in with a load of part-time to, the old boring narrative of work during the day and then train twice a week and play on a weekend for the love of the game and stuff. Whereas, the National League now is 90% professional. It's effectively, and I always say this, it's effectively League 3. Because you look at some of the clubs in there's a lot of clubs in there with recent Football League experience. I mean, look at last year's playoff final was Southend against Oldham, which is, it's not so long ago. That was a championship game. And, Oldham, of course, have been in the Premier League, and Southend, am I right in thinking, played against Sunderland in League 1 4 or 5 years ago. So this is, it's a league that is strong. And I spoke to one player that had been released by Newcastle about 2 weeks ago, and he said he just wants to play men's football. That he was a bit bored of under-21s and the kind of it's routine, isn't it? It's just that standard play out from the back and passing. There's not really any physical side of it. It's all that. And he wanted to get into that where you're going to away grounds and being abused by supporters and getting stick and, every sort of tackle, everything matters on the pitch. So I think, there is a bit of a change in attitude towards non-league in recent years. And I mean, I look at some of the things I've seen in my time covering it for the last sort of 10, 12 years now. And, there's some things I've witnessed over the last sort of 5 years in particular that wouldn't look out of place in the Championship or Premier League. So the standard is definitely improving. But at the same time, that means the pressure on clubs to even just survive in some cases has gone up a lot in that time.
Yeah. I mean, is that got something to do with the coverage? Because, in the past, I remember when Sky put on the odd game years and years ago, and then I think BT tried it. And I'm trying to think it might have been a company who went bust before then, who I can't actually remember. But it seems like they've got...
Tanda.
Yeah, that was it. But it seems like they've got they've got constant coverage now. And it seems like from what you said, it's maybe driving that standard up.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at, I think it was obviously TNT did it last year. You've got DAZN have been doing it. Sorry, DAZN did it last year. I should say TNT before them. And I look at it now and, there's always a big story in the FA Cup. I think everyone always knows. You look at Tamworth when they played Tottenham and there was Marine as well, played Tottenham a few years back with the whole story of Jose Mourinho stood in a football ground where it backs onto someone's house, like literally backs onto someone's house and stuff like that. And, I started out doing what I'm doing at Blythe Spartans, and there isn't really a bigger club in terms of non-league in the FA Cup than Blythe Spartans, as much as they're struggling at the moment. So, there are always those stories, but you're right. The coverage, obviously you mentioned they're right for the non-league paper, and there's no better example of it than them. The amount of coverage they pull in on a weekend is ridiculous, never mind during the week. But looking nationally, I think there is a bit more of I'm really trying to resist mentioning Jamie Vardy here, but it's very, very difficult not to. But his story is kind of the one that has probably led to an increase in the coverage across non-league football. And there's so many other players that have kind of gone, it sounds stupid, but their non-league stories have gone under the radar. And, I look at players like Mikel Antonio, he's a former non-league player, and which I think others, Chris Smalling started out at Maidstone before going on to Fulham and Man United. There are infinite better examples than those two. They're just the ones that come to mind, but they're only going to help increase the coverage. And I think what I will say across the two sort of Northeast paper groups I write for, the coverage they allow me to do is incredible, and I really thank them for it, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it's bizarre that you mentioned Jamie Vardy, because where I'm sitting now, I'm literally 2 minutes walk around the corner from Stocksbridge Park Stales. They're around the corner to my house. But just on that, you did mention a few players coming through. Is it a source of untapped talent? Whether it's young players or whether it's that player who slipped through the net and he's kind of early 20s and people, there's clubs go, oh, bloody hell, actually he has got more talent and nobody's actually spotted him. Is there a lot of scouts from Championship clubs, I dare say Premier League clubs, having a look at players?
I think Premier League would be a stretch. Maybe even Championship would be a bit of a stretch. You've got to be a pretty special talent to jump from non-league even into a Premier League academy. Not that it's impossible, far from it. But I look at a good example I would use would be Owen Bailey, who, he captained Newcastle's 21s for years, and kind of just things didn't happen at senior level, and he dropped into the non-league game with Gateshead in the National League North at the time, and helped them win the National League North. Had a really good first season in the National League. They stayed up. They got the FA Trophy final when they got beat by FC Halifax Town, and then he got to move to Doncaster Rovers, so obviously won promotion with them last year into League One, and it's just been announced he's going to captain them in League One this season. So that's kind of the success story. It can become that safety net. I think everyone's probably aware of Macaulay Langstaff, who had a pretty long career, given that he's still quite young in non-league, playing for the likes of Billingham, Thonia, York City, went to Gateshead, had an unbelievable season, went to Notts County, set all sorts of records at Notts County, and now he's at Millwall in the Championship. So after being, and I know for a fact Sunderland looked at him when he was at Gateshead and Notts County. So, there are there are cases that you can point to. But I just think more than anything, there's probably a case of I mean, Peterborough's the best example because they've kind of made their recent rise based on getting untapped non-league talent. And there's so many players have gone through Peterborough and gone on to play in the Premier League. It's ridiculous. I mean, players like Dwight Gale's a good example of what's happened there, but there's so many others you could name. So it is a case of, I think, League One and League Two clubs will try and shop in that market, but I think Championship, it would have to be something very special to make that jump, because it's a massive jump into that level.
Yeah. And talk about jumps. I mean, we've talked a lot recently, of course, about that jump from the Championship to the Premier League, and we talk about the top end not really being viable if promoted clubs keep getting relegated from the Premier League, which isn't healthy. But looking at non-league, I mean, you've talked about the coverage and saying that it's not maybe what it used to be. But how healthy is non-league in terms of financial stability at the moment?
It's always difficult because I think the disparity in the finances between clubs at the top end of the National League and the bottom end is probably quite comparable in terms of the size of it to the Premier League. You've got the kind of haves and the have-nots, and I look at clubs at the top end. You've got like Forest Green, just recently promoted. There's a good budget there. I think everyone knows that. Just appointed Robbie Savage as their manager after his successful Macclesfield. You've basically got 7 or 8 clubs that were really established in the Football League not so long ago, who are now in non-league. And then you've got the clubs at the other end, and I would include Gateshead in this, because Gateshead's budget's nothing compared to theirs, really. I mean, I'm not saying it's a dismal one or anything like that. It's decent, but it's not exactly anything compared to them. So in some senses, it's not healthy. But then I think as well, that's kind of just how football's been since football, the Football League was created. There was the haves and the have-nots. I mean, we could name clubs pretty close to home that were once known as the Bank of England clubs, couldn't we? And the ones that have always put money in and kind of strive for it. You look in the Premier League now, your Man City's, your Arsenal's, your Liverpool's, and then you look at the clubs who are at the other end of it. It's the same in non-league. And is that healthy? Probably not. But is it the way it's always been? Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. That's it. Well, you've already kind of touched on it, because I was loving, actually, because I'm in the age when I can remember Oldham Athletic being in the Premier League. I remember Joe Royal taking them to semi-finals of the Cup and the finals of the Cup and all this sort of stuff. And I remember at Roker Park, Stan Collymore for Southend United, tearing us a new one and kind of running riot and all that. So these clubs we've seen, and even some of the others, Barnet, I always remember, God, I'm going back to old footy management games, but taking over Barnet, that sort of stuff, and taking them up. York City were in there, finished second. And I remember coming back from games when I was young, looking at the North East News, and they'd go, obviously, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, but then there'd be a match report on Darlington, then there'd be one on Hartlepool, then there'd be one on York. And all these clubs were Football League clubs. And, your Rochdale as well, they were in the bottom tier for years and years and years, the bottom 2 tiers there. But, I mean, they all find themselves in the National League now. What impact does it have on these clubs who have always been? I mean, do they have to really kind of adjust and kind of change almost the type of club they are? And does that obviously depend on how long they stay there?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, the one thing I always hear when clubs get relegated is, they'll bounce back because it's only non-league. And now Wrexham did that when they got relegated back in sort of the early to mid-2000s. And we know their story. They've only just recently got out of it, funded by the multi-millions of Hollywood billionaires. So it's not as easy as just bouncing back. And one of the things I've sensed in recent seasons that there's been a number of clubs have come down. And I know because I used to do the season previews for 442, and I'd always put in there about clubs that have been relegated. They'd ask me to predict a table. I mean, they'd ask me to predict it in June, which is impossible. But generally, I would put these clubs relegated sort of below the playoffs, sort of mid-table. And now when that went online, it was just, silence notifications on Twitter and ignore everything, because it would just be abuse. But then come sort of March time, you're going, well, actually, it's kind of not too far away. And that's the thing. And there's a few clubs have come down and gone down again into the National League, North or South. So it's an awful environment. I think the biggest sea change is because even in League Two you get money from Sky, even in League Two you get money from various sponsor deals that the EFL have. You don't really get that level of finance in the National League. Not that they haven't got sponsor deals, of course they have. They've got a TV deal, but it's not as lucrative as what the EFL have in place. So you have to kind of draw things back a little bit, unless you've got a very wealthy chairman, which some clubs obviously do. But there's still got to be a degree of realism and a realistic budget put in place. So it is becoming tougher, I think, because there's more clubs at the top end who are capable of making that jump into League Two. And I think the other thing we're saying is, I don't think there's as big a gap between the top end of the National League and the bottom end of League Two as there used to be. So I think when clubs do go up, and I'm not going to use Wrexham as an example because we know that's a kind of an outlier in all of this. But Notts County is not a bad example where, you know, largely the squad that went up into League Two were the one that were challenging for most of the first season at the top end of League Two. So there are good examples of that. Barnet obviously won the National League last season. I quite fancy them to do well in League Two this season. So the gap isn't as big, but I think the adjustment period, maybe in terms of finance and mentality, is bigger when you come down into that level. Yeah.
You mentioned Wrexham a couple of times there. Have they skewed anything? I mean, even in terms of, I don't know, fan expectations that they're expecting someone in a cape to come down from Hollywood and put money in, or even skewed it because they spent a bit of money while they were down there?
Yeah, and quite sad to think that one of the clubs they looked at was Hartlepool before they took over Wrexham. Would have made for some interesting coverage.
That's a huge what if, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because, and look, I also have I think it's a slightly different view to people on the Wrexham thing where I love it. Do you know what I mean? If it was Gateshead, if it was South Shields, I would absolutely love nothing more than for that to happen, where this massive story that no one expects, and all of a sudden there's big players signing for them and they're on TV week in, week out, and they're getting all this coverage across the national press. Look, if I was a supporter, I get it, but it's a jealousy thing. I think at the end of the day, you know, even if it happened to a Sunderland where some don't get me wrong, they're doing all right as it is, aren't they? But if it was a multi-billionaire Hollywood director or actor or whatever coming in, you kind of love it because it's extra money for the club. And the Wrexham story, what I love most is that they've embraced the community. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, because sometimes I think when people outside of football get involved, they just see the football club and they just see what happens between the white lines. But I think the Wrexham story, and it's beautifully told in the documentary, isn't it, that they've embraced local community, they've embraced people within the local community. And I think that's the biggest thing. But going back to the football side of it, I don't necessarily think it skewed the market, because they were kind of in a market of their own. And I think clubs knew they couldn't compete with that. Barring maybe Notts County to a degree, but even their main summer signings that summer, when they both were challenging for the title, the season before, were Macaulay Langstaff and Kedwin Scott, who were both signed from Gateshead, who were in the lower division. Whereas you look at Wrexham, they went out and got Paul Mullen, who was in League One at the time, wasn't he? He'd just been promoted to League One. So it's a difficult one to say if they did skew it. In terms of expectations, again, I would put that in a similar boat. I think people looked at them and thought, well, my club can't do that. And I think that's what you get with non-league fans. Look, every fan base has supporters who, how can I put it, are slightly unrealistic. I'm trying to think.
I was waiting to see how you were going to put that one.
Are slightly unrealistic in their aims. However, I think the vast majority are very realistic about where the clubs are at and how far the clubs can go without outside investment on new owners or anything like that. And that ain't going to happen at every club. So, no, I think they were very much an outlier.
Yeah, because I think if they had gone in there, I think there would have definitely been some Hollywood blockbuster on how, hanging a monkey or something like that back in the Napoleonic and all that. But anyway, as I said, I mean, just in terms of the non-league state of play, like I said, I live around the corner to Stocksbridge Park Steels, as you said, where Jimmy Vardy started out. A great little club. So if I'm not going to a Sunderland game, or they've got a fixture at home, I'll just wander around the corner with my lad and we'll just go to a game, and it's absolutely brilliant. You can spend less than 20 quid on the 2 years and, get a cheeky pie that he's not really allowed and all that sort of stuff. and just stand on the terraces and you've got loads of space and everyone has a laugh and all that. But do you think more people are catching on than ever? Because do you think it's almost a reaction to the top of the pyramid where that's gone so far out of people's reach that actually it's drawn more people into non-league?
I've got to say first, I've spent many a cold Tuesday night on the terrace at Brockenmoor. Yeah, one of the best views in non-league football though across the peaks, isn't it? It's a hell of a view across the cricket pitch as well. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I do think Premier League clubs are becoming where they are starting to take clubs for granted. Supporters for granted. I look at the price of tickets now, the price of season tickets, and I think particularly here in the Northeast, the kind of big two in the Premier League now have to be very aware of the local community and the financial state of where the region's at right now. I think that's a really important stance for both clubs to take, where don't price out your working class fans, because when things go wrong, when the newcomers to the Premier League, when the supporters who are latching onto a bandwagon get bored of it or things go wrong at the club, it'll be the fans that were there originally that'll keep going and will return hopefully. So I think that's looking more generally though. The Premier League's such an expensive place to go and watch football now. I've got an 11-year-old who is mad into his football, and he comes to non-league with me when I work. But he also loves watching the Premier League as well, and it's difficult. I mean, I wouldn't be able to get him there through games anyway because I'm working anyway. But when I do have that opportunity, it's an expensive day out, isn't it? And even season tickets now have just gone up and up. So I think, yeah, non-league football is probably seen as, I would say, an alternative rather than a replacement, because I don't think anything can replace what's on offer in the Premier League these days. And you look at how big it's gone worldwide. But by the same token, I don't want people to look at non-league football as if it's kind of what we were saying before, where, you know, people think it's glorified Sunday league football or anything like that. It's a good level, a really good level of football. You know, teams try to play the right way. They try to do the right things. Clubs will look after you when you go down there. So, yeah, perhaps it's more an alternative than a replacement.
Well, I mean, to be fair, though, you said they try and play the right way, but actually sometimes you want an alternative for that. You know, that you see those top clubs, and sometimes, you know, you watch the bill in a Super Sunday, Man City, Liverpool or something, and then you watch it go, bloody hell, hang on, there's something going to happen in this game, you know, the first half an hour. You go and watch a non-league game, and you'll see, you know, 5 cracking tackles in the first 5 minutes, and, you know, people, you know, and it's almost 100 miles an hour for a completely different reason. But it is, I mean, it's not always like that, don't get me wrong, but in the games I've seen, you know, it's, because even my lads mentioned that it's a different way of playing.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I look at people always talk about the Pep effect, don't they? And sort of the way Guardiola played at City and Barcelona, and the fact that it's kind of dribbled down the pyramid. And it's kind of, you do see it in non-league where clubs will play out from the back, and, you know, some clubs are really suited to it and some just aren't. And that's when it becomes a little bit comical, if I'm honest, because you see these, with all due respect, the 36-year-old centre-backs, you see these 36-year-old centre-backs who used to just defend, trying to play out from the back and getting caught out with it a bit. But then, yeah, it is. I mean, I'm a bit pains to call it a bit of a throwback because I think that's doing it a massive disrespect. But I look at it now and I think when I go to games, generally I know I'm going to see two sides really going for it and really competing. And when I say going for it, I don't just mean, you know, flying into 50-50s and all that sort of stuff. And I generally know I'm going to see two teams just looking for the win instead of almost being scared to lose, which I think is the thing in the Premier League now. It's like, you know, it's why clubs like Brighton stand out, because they go for it instead of what feels like 75% of the Premier League who are just scared to lose a game. And I think in non-league it goes the other way where, you know, clubs go out to win. That's the top and bottom of it.
That's it. And I mean, just looking at who you might see in action, I mean, when I was young, you used to always get the partnerships between, I'm going to say, the likes of the Sunderlands and Newcastles and the Darlingtons and the Gatesheads and all this, where actually every summer, we'll send a couple of players there on loan. I mean, do you still see that? Do you still get that? And are those kind of more formal, those partnerships now?
I don't think as much now, because I thought when Kevin Phillips was appointed at Sunderland, I was convinced there would be a bit of a I was going to say a flood of players there to South Shields, but I certainly thought there would be an increase in players going on loan, and I think there's only Ben Middlemiss went on loan to South Shields at the time. Same with Elliot Dickman when he went in there. Ben might have went there when Elliot was manager, actually. With Elliot's connections with Newcastle and Sunderland as an academy coach, again, you thought he might go down that route, but I think there was maybe one or two from either side went there. There's certainly nothing formal in place as such, but what I will say is I think Sunderland deserve a massive amount of credit for what they're doing and what they've done the last sort of 2-3 years now, where they are playing South Shields and Gateshead on the opening weekend of pre-season, because not only does it do a brilliant start to their pre-season, it gives them momentum. No matter what the scoreline is, it's a great start point for players against, lads that last season were going to be in the Championship or this year going to be in the Premier League. It's a really great high point to start their pre-season. And look, it doesn't happen with every club. I mean, I know Gateshead played Middlesbrough last year, and I think if Michael Carrick and the situation at Middlesbrough hadn't happened in recent weeks, it might have happened again this year. Newcastle played Gateshead a couple of years ago. Hasn't happened this year again, but they're sending a 21s team to South Shields. So there is that sort of relationship, I would say, rather than partnership. But I certainly think it's something that should be encouraged. I think 21s teams should go and play National League North, Northern Premier League teams on a regular basis. I think that's the connection that needs to be built between the clubs and non-league clubs, because it's something that I think has gone a little bit missing. And I still say, and it may be a little bit of an old-fashioned attitude, but I think 21s players, certainly the kind of top end of the 21s, it would do them good to experience National League football and National League North football to get them used to it, and get them used to, where it does matter if you miss out on a tackle, where it does matter if you miss a chance, instead of 21s where it's a little bit, it's kind of cleansed a bit, isn't it? Where it's this methodical style of football that we see week in, week out. So I think there is a partnership, a connection that should be strengthened there.
Yeah, and actually I was looking, and look, my sources wasn't the best, to be fair. It was Wikipedia, to be fair. So apologies if this isn't right, but I was just looking at, in terms of Shields' biggest attendances, I think like 3 or 4 of them were against Sunderland in pre-season. And I think, looking at Gateshead, I think their top one was against Newcastle. So, I mean, does this make a difference? I mean, does this actually give a boost to the coffers for the likes of Shields and Gateshead?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, we should say both clubs are full-time professional clubs. And I think that means that the fit levels that Sunderland and Sunderland will face on Saturday will be good fitness levels. They're not going in against part-time players here. But from a financial point of view, I'm not sure how many tickets have been sold for Gateshead, but I know South Shields have announced it to sell out, which will be, 3,500-ish. Now, it's not just the match tickets, is it? It's the people buying programs. It's people going in the club shop. It's in the bar. It's the
definitely
burger stalls and whatever else. That's it.
Looking at the weather, definitely the bar.
Yeah. I mean, do you know what it is? I was thinking about this the other day. So I'm covering the game for the from a Gateshead point of view and a South Shields point of view, for the Chronicle Journal, Sunday Sun, Shields Gazette, and Sunderland Echo. But then I've also been asked to cover it from a Sunderland point of view for the Sunday Sun. So, by sort of, I would say 7:30 on Saturday night, I'll probably be joining you in the bar at South Shields. But it's massive for both clubs, and you can't understate just how important the finance these fixtures will bring as a start point, as a foundation for their budgets for the season. Now, I'm not going to say the fixture is going to allow them to go out and bring in a striker for 250 grand or anything like that. It's not, but it's going to take a little bit of the weight off them because, you mentioned before about the financial pressures in non-league, and any little route of income they can get to improve their situation they will take, and this is certainly one of them.
Yeah, that's it. And well, let's get into the two sides, because we'll mention them a few times. So we'll deal with Gateshead first, because I was looking just on paper, that they finished 6th in the National League last year, finished 14th the year before after getting promoted. And they tailed off towards the end and just missed out in the playoffs. And, obviously from someone from the outside just looking at it on paper, it seemed a bit harsh that Magnay resigned, Carl Magnay, and they replaced him with former Ipswich striker Alan Armstrong. And then I started getting into it, and it just seems to have been one thing after another. And then actually just recently, last day or so, I was seeing headlines that they've had the transfer embargo, I think it was, lifted. But it just seems to have been kind of one event after the other. And even then, they seem to do well on the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, it's a roller coaster covering Gateshead. So I really feel for the supporters. I mean, I go back to 2018-19 when they were literally 72 hours from going out of business because of the actions of previous owners. Were rescued by a supporter-led consortium who, took charge of the club and appointed Mike Williamson and Ian Watson as a management team. Ian Watson, who's now manager of South Shields. And then they went into dealing with the COVID and the financial situation that COVID imposed on clubs. Came out of that, won the National League North, got to the FA Trophy final in their first season in the National League. In their second season, lost Mike Williamson, MK Dons, appointed Rob Elliott, got to the trophy final again, won it, qualified for the playoffs, but then weren't allowed to go in the playoffs because of a situation with the International Stadium's security of tenure. Starting the next season like a house on fire in terms of last season. Were more in the title race at the start of the season. Then lost their captain to a season-ending injury. Lost Rob Elliott, the manager, to Crawley. And then players were sold, having interest from Scotland and the EFL. And then the second half of last season, with Carl Magnay in charge, I felt for Carl because there was a lot going on. He had, key players missing through injury. I'm fairly certain the next question will involve the takeover led by the Victor Anichebe consortium. That clouded everything at the club. And look, if I'm honest, the second half of last season was a complete and utter shambles. On the pitch, results were hard to come by. Off the pitch, there was kind of there was a lot happening, but not a lot happening at the same time. And the biggest disappointment was the fact that they went the whole second half of the season without hitting form, really, yet were still in the playoffs, or still in with a chance of the playoffs on the final day of the season, and then put in a completely lifeless display against Southend, drew 0-0, didn't really create a chance, didn't feel as if there was a belief they could go and get a win that would have got them in the playoffs. So it was a dismal season. Then since then, the chairman stepped down. Obviously, as you say, Carl Magnay resigned. Greg Ollie, the club captain, left the club. The head of recruitment, Luke Clark, has left for a role in the AFL. There are several that people have left the club as well, scouts and such like, and the club doctor. But there is a bit of a rebuild going on, and there are the shoots of recovery. Now, obviously, we're recording this on Wednesday. On Tuesday night, I was at Hebburn Town for Gateshead's opening pre-season game, and they put out a bit of a mixed team with a few academy lads and a few first teamers, and there's only 2 league difference between the two sides, but Gateshead won 4-0, and I came away quite positive. Now, fully aware Saturday is going to be very, very different, and they may take a heavy defeat on Saturday, who knows, but there are positive signs. Now, do I think there will be players leaving? Yes, because I know some have got EFL interest, so I think more players will leave, but at the same time, as you mentioned there, the FIFA registration ban's being lifted. So I think I know there will be players come in if players go. So the club isn't in danger. They're in a difficult situation, but there's still going to be a Gateshead football club. There's still people working very hard behind the scenes to push it forwards. They just need the local community to get behind it more, I think.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, it was just such a shame, really, that all of that was going on. Because you talk about an opportunity for Gateshead to push into, or to get a chance into those playoffs, which is then a lottery to get into the Football League for the first time. I mean, that just, it almost seems like a wasted opportunity that all of that was going on in the background and they weren't allowed to just focus on the football. So, I mean, did that really impact them on the pitch, or can we make too much of it?
No, I think it did. And I've heard several players speak about the impact that the off-field talk had, because there was talk of some pretty big names coming in. I mean, relatively big names coming into the club. There was talk of players would be moved on to make space for them. There was people within the new ownership group who were very forthright in their views on what was going on at the club, and maybe having an impact when they shouldn't have been allowed to have an impact. It should have been very much going on in the background, but it was all played out very much in the foreground, and I think that proved detrimental to performances on the pitch, which is sad, because I mean, there's a lot of talk about Gateshead's attendances, and generally they tend to get, either side of 1,000, which isn't really enough to sustain. It's not really enough to sustain National League football, if I'm honest, but it certainly wouldn't be enough for EFL football. But I do wonder if, and I don't say this from my point of view, but I do wonder if some supporters maybe see the non-league thing as a stigma. So if they were to get in League Two, if they were to start playing clubs, that have played in the top end, maybe their attendances would go up. I know for a fact away fans would increase. So the attendances will go up organically anyway. So it's a huge missed opportunity, I think, and one that I hope in years to come they don't learn to regret that.
And just quickly in terms of that, Gateshead and attendances, because it's funny, because even the conversation with people about the double header, it's like, oh, I really want a ticket for Shields because it's a nice little atmosphere, and you can get around the pitch, you can have a beer, you can have a laugh and all this. So when you're close to the action, and people just enjoy it, and then people are saying, I'm not going to bother with Gateshead because you're miles away from it. I mean, how much does that impact Gateshead? Because I remember years ago even going to Harrogate Town before they got into the Football League, thinking, oh, this is a great little place, clubhouse afterwards, just there for a couple of beers. Had a completely different feeling than going to Gateshead in the International Stadium.
There's two ways to look at it. One, I 1,000,000% get that perspective. 100%. You are sat far away from the pitch. It's not the greatest football stadium. It's an athletic stadium. Everyone knows that. But when it is, when they do get sort of crowds up and above 1,500, 2,000, there's a good atmosphere there, and they create a good atmosphere. So the other side of it is, and I look at it from the club's point of view. Now they have everything they want in it, apart from that little bit of running track. In that place, they've got a stadium that has training facilities a short distance away. They've got club offices within there. They've got a gym that they can use in there. So everything kind of works from the club's point of view, apart from the whole running track, the pitch. So it's a difficult one. And let's be honest, I think looking for a site in Gateshead where you can build a stadium that might be 5,000 capacity max or whatever, with the capability of going bigger if needed. It's not easy. There's not a lot of room to build on. So for the moment, they are probably stuck there. And because of the financial situation at the club, they are going to have to play there from now on. There's not really anywhere that could ground share at the moment. Given the history of both Gateshead and Sunderland, Gateshead and South Shields, I'm certainly not going to suggest a ground share there. Yeah, given the history between South Shields and Gateshead, I'm certainly not going to suggest that they should ground share. It's a very shaky ground to go on, a very shaky conversation that I don't really want to be part of. But there isn't really anywhere Gateshead can ground share at the moment, so they just have to get on with life at the International Stadium. That's the top and bottom of it. I know it's not great to watch football there. I know it's not a great environment, but it is their home, and they will do all they can to make it, to create the sort of atmosphere that they have. I know they haven't got the biggest fan base, but the ones that they've got are loyal, really loyal. And the, lads and lasses that will travel to Eastleigh on a Tuesday night and Torquay on a Tuesday night and places like that and get behind the lads. And they're essential, absolutely essential to the club. So for the moment, they are at the International Stadium. That's kind of just the way it is.
Yeah. So you said they started off pretty well against Hebburn. So I mean, are you expecting them to make a push? I mean, is that realistic for them?
It's really, really hard to suggest where they'll finish this season. Now, I think staying in the league would be a success. And I realise that sounds like a massive come down from being in and around the playoffs last season. But I think with all the changes at the club, look, there's still a very talented starting 11, maybe a talented sort of 15, 16 there. But you're then relying on good luck with injuries and suspensions, and will an AFL club and come in and take this player or, move for this player. So it's very difficult to assess where they'll finish. At the moment, and this is purely at the moment, it may well change throughout pre-season when signings come in and such like. I just think stabilising this season is having a season of no drama and just maybe have a decent little cup run and staying in the National League, for me, would be a success, and laying the foundations in place for what will hopefully be progression next season. I know that sounds really negative, and it really does. And even coming out my mouth, I can hear myself going, "That's so bad, Mark." Just coming off a season where they've challenged for the playoffs on the back of another season where they won the FA Trophy. Just saying stay in the league sounds like a real backstep, and it is to a degree. But I think it just has to be a cooling of expectations ahead of the season. And I know that's not what supporters want to hear, but this is a very new squad. I know. It is a very new squad with a new manager and a new chairman and new people on the board. So it's just a case of, let's see. I think that's probably the best way I can say it.
Yeah, Alan Armstrong's got a big job there. But let's move on to South Shields. Just a league below. They've had 2 seasons in the National League North, finished 8th in the first year there, and they slipped to 17th last season. Elliot Dickman kind of finished the season there, for obviously former Sunderland player and then academy coach at Sunderland and Newcastle. And this summer they've replaced him with Ian Watson. And I was reading one of your articles from just the other day, I think it was, and you were saying you thought it was a good move for the club.
Brilliant move. I've known Ian since he was a left back at Blythe Spartans back in about 2013-14, and went on to play for Darlington, Spennymoor. And the biggest thing with Ian is he stepped into coaching, and coached at Gateshead, was a big part of. I would actually say he was a joint manager with Mike Williamson, but officially he was assistant manager. But what he was doing in terms of recruitment, in terms of the in and around the squad, he was very much, I would say, on the level of Mike. Ian would refute that. I've got no doubt about it. But I'll say it. And then obviously he followed Mike to MK Dons and to Carlisle United. And I know it didn't quite work out there. And, I know supporters will look at that. But the one thing I found when he left both clubs is the amount of messages that you saw on social media from players that were established in the EFL talking about how great his coaching methods were and how good a person he was. Kind of marries him with everything I experienced at Gateshead with him. So I think Ian, to me now, feels ready to take that lead role in the dugout and be the manager. I think he's classed as a head coach, but it's one and the same, really, isn't it? Let's be honest. And I think he's come at the right time for South Shields, and I think South Shields has come at the right time for him. Now, he's got Carl Magner, who we obviously mentioned earlier at Gateshead. He's his assistant manager. I've got a little bit of a feeling it might end up being a similar relationship with Mike Williamson, where it's not borderline, so not too far short of being joint managers. So it's a good management team in there now. There's a number of people in behind the scenes on the coaching staff that have stayed with the club who will only help them. They've had a good start in terms of recruitment. Some very, very good players added to the squad that will play the way Ian wants to play. He has a very defined style of play. It is high press, it's high energy. They will try and play out from the back when possible. And it'll take time to implement that. So I think there has to be a degree of patience. But I do think it's a very, very good appointment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just obviously looking at South Shields, because I think it was obviously well documented, their kind of quick rise through the leagues. What was it? I wanted to say it was only about 5 years ago, but it was about 10 years ago. Didn't quite feel as long ago as that. But you look at where they've finished in the league, for the last 10 years, and it's kind of first, second, third, fourth, second, first, and then National League North 8th, 17th. It does feel like a levelling off for South Shields in the National League North.
But there should be, for every club, there should be a levelling off period at some point, even, and I can't believe I'm going back to them, but even Wrexham will probably that next season.
Is this their rightful level, would you say? Or are they still punching above maybe their weight?
No, I think this is their level. I think for the time being, this is their level. I think the money that went in, that when Jeff Thompson first took over the club and bringing in the likes of Julio obviously going there as well, kickstarting that. That initially was possibly to a degree expected because their budget was far in excess of clubs at the same level. COVID hit them. There's no doubt about that because of the fact they were going to win the Northern Premier League title. They were 12 points clear with about 7 games to go before the season got curtailed. That possibly halted things a little bit of the momentum. However, they still went full time during the COVID period, which was obviously a massive step for any club to take. And I just look at it now and, yeah, I think that they're probably at the level where they should be. I mean, when you look at Jeff Thompson, when he went in there as chairman and took over the club, there was the investment there, the likes of Julio Arca joining the club, the momentum built up, the budget was far in excess of anything at Northern League level. So the success they had, I'm absolutely not downplaying the fact they won 4 trophies in one season because that'll go down in history and rightly so. But I think to a degree they were expected to challenge for those. They were expected to challenge for the NPL East title, I think it was classed as then. They should have won the Northern Premier League Premier Division title during COVID before the season was curtailed. I mean, they were 12 points clear with about 7 games left. They were going to win that league title and get another promotion. The National League North is a total different kettle of fish. There are professional clubs in there along with South Shields. Obviously, they're one now as well. But there are also bigger budgets in there. So I think this level is where they are right for now. And we shouldn't forget the second half of last season was the first time that they haven't challenged for something during the second half of the season since Jeff came in. Even the season before when they finished 8th or 9th or whatever it was, they were still in line or challenging, I should say, for a playoff place in the National League North that season. So last year was a major disappointment. And I think this year it will be a case of, can we challenge top half and look to push towards those playoffs? Again, there's a lot of unknowns at South Shields this season because the new management team and how they want to do things and how quickly the players adapt to what they want. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that works.
Yeah. We'll see. Keep an eye on South Shields. So we're obviously, as Sunderland fans, I imagine majority of people who listen to this are Sunderland fans. We know what we want out of it from a Sunderland perspective in terms of, match fitness, potentially looking at a signing or two and seeing the first look at it first. I remember the same last season where I think, there was a couple of players that we wanted to look at who we'd signed before these games. But from a South Shields point of view, from a Gateshead point of view, where are they at in their pre-season and what do they want out of it? I mean, are they starting to step it up at this point, whereas we're just starting off?
No, to be honest. I mean, it's Gateshead's second friendly, but South Shields will be there first. So there's an argument to say that. I realise, again, they're from different levels, but both fan bases will look at the game as Sunderland fans will. They are looking to see new signings to see how they work. Look at the team that have been out on loan have come back, because I imagine Sunderland, if the lads have come back from loan spells elsewhere. So it's very similar, and I think this is it's a big game for both clubs.
Yeah, that's it. So you said you're covering both, so you're going to be in attendance at both games?
I am, yeah. So I've got a busy afternoon, so we'll be covering from a Shields. And then covering from a Sunderland point of view for the Sunday Sun and Journal. So, it's going to be a busy afternoon, all with a 7:30 deadline as well. So that could be.
Well, that's it. I think at that point it's going to be a well-earned pint after doing all those hours of work and watching everyone else go to the bar backwards and forwards. But I suppose on that note, it just leaves me to say, enjoy, Mark. I hope you have a cracking day, and with the sun kind of bouncing, and you do get to have that beer at the end of it all, mate.
Yeah, well, and again, just a thanks to Sunderland for what they do for the non-league clubs, because it's a massive start of pre-season. Looking forward to seeing a good amount of fans at both South Shields and Gateshead as well.
Good stuff. And brilliant. And thanks for your time again, Mark. Really appreciate it, mate. And thanks again for everyone for listening. We'll have all the build-up covered on the Roker Report website for the games, and obviously the pretty much daily releases on Howie the podcast. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.